I'm going to say this video is going to be controversial because the fact is that this is my opinion, but I've seen it from what I've seen on the internet. And yes, I know the internet's not the best example, and well, I'm only 18, but this is how I believe the world works. There are a few frameworks on how certain people look at it. The by the book person, where if it's a rule, it is in stone. There are not as many of those as many people think, because there's also certain groups of people that are more than willing to follow the law. But when a situation is so bad and the law is not in that favor, people take it in their own hands because, well, they believe that's a justice, even though legally it isn't. Because the fact is that humanity has a interesting habit of making rules for itself that it's going to break. For example, vigilantism. The first way of crime fighting. It was even invented, it was there even before cops were there. And it's still in the law by self-defense. Because there's, not to my knowledge, no nation on this planet that doesn't allow legal self-defense, even though it's most of the time non-lethal. Not lethal self-defense, but to get to the point, to my discussion on how the world works, is that if there is a problem, for example, a father hears about a rapist raping their kid, that father will bury that rapist. And most people see that as fine because it is fine. Because the fact is that most people in this situation would consider the rapist non-deserving of life. Because the fact is, rape is worse than murder. And people that are by the book would be surprised by the fact that a majority of humanity would not see that as a moral question. Because the fact is that society, the way we have it, has only existed for 100, 200 years. And yes, I'm being a little bit broad with that definition. But the fact is that law is only law when people enforce and do the law. For example, in Iowa, to my knowledge, you cannot... If, for example, you pass margarine and say, can you pass the butter? And pass margarine instead of butter, that is technically a legal offense. Is anyone going to enforce that? No. There are a lot of laws that are not even enforced anymore. It's just the fact of life is that nobody knows all the laws. That's a symptom of this, but another fact is that humanity very much has an idealism, believing that justice will always prevail, and it's blind. That is a optimistic way to see the world, but it's not true. Because justice is only justice to certain people. It's the entire argument of for example, a terrorist is a terrorist to a nation they are being a terrorist to. For example, if in Nazi Germany a Jewish man fires a Molotov cocktail into an SS bunk barracks, by the definition of terrorism, that Jewish man is a terrorist. But we would call him a freedom fighter. And same thing in Gaza. So just switch the people around. Where the fact is that in my first example, no one was going to argue on the behalf of the Nazi. No, well, okay, let me rephrase that. Because we live in a god-awful world. But majority of people would not would not argue on the behalf of the Nazi. But in Gaza, the people are on the side of Israel for the reason of the fact it's terrorism. Where for the people in Gaza and Palestinians, it's the same thing. Because the fact is, the only real difference is the fact that Germany, or Nazi Germany, fell in 1945. Israel is still around and still a political player, and the United States backs them. Meaning they're on the right side of history. And the Palestinians are on the wrong side of history. Or that is how many people see it on the right of the issue. And many people try to combine that with the fact that being anti-Israel is considered anti-Jew. It isn't. Yes, in certain ways it is, but you can disagree with a government and still be in support of the religion of that government and its people. But to get to the point of the fact that humanity is very tribalistic to basically how humanity isn't black and white, and the fact that gray spots exist in all humanity. First, in every single profession, there's a sense of trust. From the military to police, doctors, lawyers, teachers, trash people, etc. From a cart pusher at a grocery store to politicians that run nations. Trust is one of the most accommodated currencies. And organizations and parties that can't form trust tend to fail. For example, in Nazi Germany and authoritarian nations, you can't build trust in the same way you can do it in democracies. Yes, you can, but it's more dangerous. Because the fact is, in authoritarian states, trust is how you stay alive. And as much as we democracies say, we're not as bad as them, we are, it's just that we don't actively kill them. Is that in every single profession, if you lose the trust of somebody, they will not trust you to do a certain task or anything. For example, rats and snitches are in the same category of bad because the fact is, going to the authorities is, as many people would put it, a big step. Unless if it's rape or sexual assault of a minor, most people will say that's a bit extreme. Because, for example, if you see a young woman, steal a small bottle of baby formula, a good human being, by most people's standards, because baby formula is like, for a 1 ounce bottle, $20. Most people are not going to interact with her at all. Because the fact is that she isn't actively harming anybody. Yes, arguably she is stealing. But the fact is, what those companies do is honestly more like theft than she would ever do. To get to the point of this video, is that, and get to the bare bones of the video, is that in professions, trust is both good and bad. For example, if a police officer pulls over another police officer, they expect leniency because they're another police officer. Because they're from the same tribe. Yes, I'm using these words because, well, it's true. So, to get to the rest of the point, if that cop pulls over a cop for drinking and driving and loses his shield, or whatever it's called, that cop will be considered a snitch by everybody. By upper leadership, down leadership, everybody. Especially the people that cop liked. Unless and this is only the case unless nobody liked that person. Unless nobody liked them, they're going to have enemies in their career. From doctors, teachers, everybody. They're going to have enemies because of it. That's just the fact. If you are a snitch or a rat from legal to illegal organizations, it is not too much of a fetch to say, hey, you will lose trust, and in the legal world of jobs, you will, for example, if you're a police officer or a soldier, marine, etc., and you report someone for something that isn't too extreme. Yes, if you report someone for murder, asterisks, if you report someone for murder, no one's going to call you a snitch, but it depends on the person. But if it's small, people are going to be dicks about it. Because, for example, if in the military, in the military, and this is anecdotal, meaning I've never been in the military, but it's probably true, is that if you snitch on another soldier, marine, airman, sailor, etc., for something small like uniform violation, or if they're a underage soldier drinking alcohol, they will become an enemy to the friends of that person and to anyone they respect. Because snitches and rats, they always get stitches. For a reason. And that happens in every career. And yes, I know that's anecdotal from my experience. I am not saying this from personal experience. I'm just seeing it from observation of humanity. Is that in every form of organization, that kind of trust has to be built. If it isn't, people are not going to trust anybody. And people being paranoid in a work scenario typically has that go downhill and burn. Because the fact is that rules are only enforced when they need to be. Because many people will say the law is the law, when it isn't. Because the fact is that people are people. And people very much can break the rules. For example, as the example of the illegal drinking of a soldier or officer, especially if in certain social hierarchies where, for example, you've gone through hardship, like police officers, fighter fighters, paramedics, doctors, etc., you get personal because hard shit is personal to deal with. For example, soldiers, marines, airmen, etc., all clump up together to be each other's support structure, even though they're not going to outright say it. And being too much into it is going to make it different, unless it's very difficult. But I'm using the military as a great example because military, police, etc., because the fact is that if you've been in a life or death situation and someone ratting you out hasn't been, I'm gonna say, even with no experience in an active situation like that, it doesn't take a genius to know that rat is a rat. And, well, regulations are regulations, but making someone's life a living hell, to the book, is completely to the book. Because even if a rat does rat, I will say, is when that ratting is done, they're a rat. And unless they have a lot of friends that make it so they are shielded from it, or they go and witness protection, the fact is that many people would do legally or by regulation or whatever situation that person is in, would try to make that rat's life a living hell. From being, for example, in prison, they get shanked. As a police officer, you get left for dead. Or get bureaucrated to death, or make your job as painful as possible, metaphorically speaking. Basically make it so that person doesn't need to see that rat anymore. And that is just a common fact of society, is that rats, snitches, and people that report situations that are against the book, and unless are completely dire, like sexual assault or pedos, those are going to be seen as rats and snitches. Because the fact is that unless it's happening to you or someone you directly know and can justify the behavior in that way, because yes, technically it is justifiable to report, but regulation and law don't mean jack shit to people's psyche. That is my discussion on the human psyche, of tribalism and how rules are only built by humans for humans and to be enforced by humans.